we're really happy to have you on, and I think it's going to be great having a kind of beginner's perspective of what the therapy journey has been like for you so far. And if you want to just get started by kind of giving us a little elevator speech of who you are, what you do, what you're kind of about, so the listeners can get an idea.
Yeah, sure. So, first and foremost, thanks for having me. It's always fun talking mental health stuff. Elevator pitch. So I'm Rob Murray. Just a dude who lives in Canada as a career. I'm in corporate. So I'm a senior product manager of security products. Outside of that, I do a little bit of firearms teaching and whatnot with another company I work with. Yeah, is that what you wanted?
You can get into a bit more too about your extracurricular activities with Airsoft and how we know each other.
Yeah, sure. So outside of like my professional career, I was extremely lucky for a big chunk of my, I guess, adult life from about 30 until a couple of years ago. I played a sport, or what I consider a sport. It's like paintball. It's called airsoft. Instead of big paintballs, it's just little tiny plastic BBs. No big deal. But I traveled around North America going to massive events at military facilities, at government training facilities, et cetera, et cetera. So again, it was just a hobby of mine that I fell into becoming, I guess, a person in it, right? Like a temporary icon in it, just through social media. It's sort of when I started Airsoft, this is like way back in 2010 kind of deal. And had switched finally from a BlackBerry to a real phone, so I could install apps. So I got Instagram, and for whatever reason, people started slowly following me over time, right? And then that led to things like sponsorships and flying me around and all that fun stuff. And then that led me into the firearms world, which is sort of the segue of how I met Tanya. Way down the road, being current times, from 2010. Again, I've got this platform on a platform like Instagram, and mainly it's, a platform just to share what I like in the industry kind of deal, and communicate with people. That's a big part of what I used social media for. So it wasn't just like, hey, look at me. Yes, I was producing content, right? But I think with the feedback I've always gotten over the last decade is, my interactivity with the people that followed me. I've got now friends all over the world that I met through social media, right? And I kept in touch with them, which, again, like I said, led me to Tanya and more so the collective. So funny enough, due to social media, I met Seb. And I met Seb because, like the internet is, Seb had posted something and then some person who didn't do their research had commented on his things, basically questioning where he had the experience to comment on policing matters. And I was just like, dude, did you not even open Seb's profile? Like, you obviously did not, right? So Seb, from that day on, he and I talked. He was like, dude, that was pretty epic that you did that. And I'm like, well, I just know who you are. It was...
apologies for interrupting.
Go ahead.
Seb Lavoie, former Sergeant Major of the BC RCMP. He was police daddy of that province. I refuse to change that title.
He still is police daddy, let's be honest.
He's police daddy forever.
Yeah.
And he is occasional guest on the collective. So SWAT guy, former Special Forces, overall badass. Yeah, you had met him, and then through your appearances on the collective and me encountering your social media, we became friends. And this segues into the mental health month that the collective did, and you had posted a series regarding mental health, and you had mentioned that you were first starting therapy, or you're about to start therapy. So I think a good place to start would be, when and why did you realize that you needed to go get help?
That's a good question. I guess let me start with the overarching statement, right? Is that there's probably a good 10 or 15 years of me thinking about it, right? And that's almost tragic to think back. I've been struggling with things, thinking I'm fine for 10, 15 years without, asking for help, right? I think that's pretty common in this space for the average person. But what really started it is I had a bit of a breakdown this past spring. And the spring is the significant sort of period of time. So, not to jump the shark or that, right? But you know, April of this year was the 1 year anniversary of my brother's suicide. So, like I did really well with. Maybe I should check my language. I thought I was doing very well over the last year, handling everything. Like, I mean, for me, I was that one in the family that became the rock. So I was spearheading a lot of things and whatnot, and I at the time I kind of equated that to doing well, right? Like this stoicism that I brought to the table and getting things done sort of attitude around a very terrible event, right? And that continued throughout the year, like that feeling of like, I handled this pretty well. And I attribute that, some background info here. Grew up in kind of a poopy house situation, like a living situation when I was growing up as a kid. So like I kind of looked back and I was like, man, all that sucked, but at least it prepared me a little bit for this kind of deal, right? And then when this spring rolled around, it was tough. Like I don't know what happened, but my brain just sort of went upside down. And I think the quintessential moment. It's weird where these things come from, right? And that is through social media. I just so happen to know the lead singer of one of my favorite bands on the planet. Like he started playing airsoft like 5 years ago, and I became his mentor. It was really weird. So he invited me. They were doing a 20th anniversary tour this year, and he invited myself and one of my other buddies from the industry down to Michigan to backstage, whole nine yards, right at one of their shows. And then we were hanging out in the tour bus afterwards, and we got into these topics. Like he's big on mental health too. He actually co-runs an organization called Heart Support out of the United States. It's like it's a therapy slash sort of wellness group that really was born out of the music industry, like the metal music industry. So a lot of like big metal artists and whatnot will go and like do talks for them and about their journeys and such. Kind of like what you guys are doing, just with music focus. And he was talking about what he had just been through, and he was just kind of telling me his story, and it just hit me like a sledgehammer in the face. Because I was right in I was right in the middle of that. Like, obviously I was hiding it well for things like for an event like a concert, right? But he was saying it to me the moment that in my life I was really struggling quietly with it. And I'd been searching for like months previous to find a therapist, going on all the websites that said like, here's your menu of therapists kind of deal. And I don't know what I'm looking for, right? I'm seeing faces and I'm seeing qualifications, but like, I don't know anything, right? But when I came home from that concert, not immediately, but like a week or two later kind of thing, I finally pulled the trigger and I just contacted a therapist. She's still my therapist, but I mean, I just contacted one of the ones I'd researched, and here I am.
A lot of what you're talking about is, like you said, a very common experience of people for a very long time thinking, oh, that might be something that would be helpful. I could probably use that. But the process itself is overwhelming and stigmatized. So there's so many reasons to just put it off. And so I think that adds a whole other layer to it. And then I often hear, at least with clients, is that because one of the first things I ask when they have an intake is, what made you pick up the phone now? Right? Like, if you've been having issues, like, what was the inflection point that made you realize now's the time? And it's very similar to what you're talking about, where there's a loss or a big change or transition, and they do the whole thing of like, I can be strong about it. I can be the rock. I don't need help. I'm just going to kind of bubble up and go through life and think I'm fine. And then something happens that seems small and they just like snap, and it becomes this realization of like, oh God, I need to do this. And so it sounds like, that kind of made you just jump in, even if you weren't sure if the therapist was best, or, if you really knew exactly that was going to be what you needed. And so I guess I'm just curious, like, when you did have that first session, what did that look like? What were your fears about how it was going to look? And did those end up being true, or did it end up being different than what you thought it was?
I want to cap something off that you had said there, if that's okay. and this is more for, again, if we're speaking to the beginner on this one, right? Like, understand too that my hesitation to go into therapy is not coming from a place where I wasn't supported or unfamiliar. Like, my brother was in therapy for a long time, right? Like, I was very well aware of the concept. I mean, my parents had always said, well, my dad had always said, like, like maybe it's something you have to think about. Like, I've had really good support structures in that arena, right? And I'm also a person was very honest with myself, saying, like, yes, therapy would be good for you, and yet I still couldn't do it for a very long time, right? And like that's important for people to understand, because there's a lot of people that are also afraid of therapy, right? So it's hard, but it's hard for everybody, I think, in most cases, or at least was for me. And I'm a little bit better situated up here about the concept of therapy than I think many average people are, right? Because of the stigmatization and all the lack of support structures. Now, how that looked when I first, so yeah, like I said, I didn't know what I was choosing. Like I did understand that, from doing some of that research, right? Like, the helpful thing about some of the sort of directories that we have, at least in Canada, okay, with mental health professionals, is that, like, it lists out the specialties and modalities, right? Like, while I don't really purely understand all the modalities, right? I'm not a psychologist. Understanding someone's specialty, like, do they deal with male PTSD? Do they deal with childhood trauma? Do they deal with XYZ? Was a really important first step for me to make this giant bucket of talking heads, like little headshots, into like a smaller, more manageable decision pool. Now, the first session wasn't a full session. It was actually we probably spent about 20 minutes as an initial meeting, right? A trial, hey, can we talk to each other's faces kind of deal, and like, what will therapy look like, or what do we want to go after, right? Like that vetting process, I guess. And I don't know if that's normal. This is my first time on that journey. It seems pretty normal, but we did that. To be frank, I don't know what I came out of that with, right? Like, other than the thought that I'm going to seek this therapeutic sort of pathway, but like things like, ultimately, do I know in that first 20 minutes if I'm truly going to understand or get along with this person that's going to be accepting my baggage and help me sort through it? I don't know. Like, I don't know what that felt like, right? Like, and that's going to kind of be a common theme for the first few therapy sessions for me, right? So in any case, I don't know if it was a lack of like not knowing, or like, if I'm going to have this same feeling at the end of like 4 or 5 of these like little trial things, why don't I just say, let's do it, right? So I said, let's do it. It's my therapist's name is Susan, and she's younger. She's probably like below 30s kind of deal. The first couple sessions, just because I want to continue that idea of what it felt like. The thing is, I struggled the first couple. Like, I mean, I don't mean like struggle like it was hard for me to keep going. Like, I had total faith in it. So it's not like I ever thought like maybe I should go get a different therapist or stop therapy. But for the first couple sessions, it was hard for me to recognize what it should feel like. Like, I don't know how to explain it any other way other than like, I just didn't know what I didn't know. And like, I still kind of don't know what it's supposed to feel like, right? And I've told her this before too, right? I'm like, I don't know how I should be thinking about our sessions, or like how I feel in between sessions. And then when I come back, like, I don't know how I'm supposed to, I don't know what it is supposed to be, we're just doing it kind of deal. So, I mean, that was the initial sort of feeling of it in any case.
And that is a very common theme of clients who it's their first time in therapy, is I've had them ask, like, okay, so like, I hear that you validate my feelings, but what do I do with it? Like, how am I going to get better from talking about this? And it's very jarring when you're new at it, because it feels like you're just like holding your heart and soul and all of your deepest feelings open for an hour, and then you're shutting it again, and you're like, all right, I guess I'll see you next week. Like, it's super strange. And, obviously in the beginning, a lot of it is rapport building and making sure that you trust this other person enough that you feel comfortable getting deeper into it. But it is definitely a strange feeling for everyone. And like you said, that like the 20-minute like consultation that it sounds like you had before starting, that's a very common thing too that therapists will offer, um, so that people get an idea of like who you are. And you're not going to be able to tell right away generally if you can fully trust them, but like you can get some sense of a vibe of like, does this feel like the kind of person I can talk to? Like, does even their just personality seem like a fit for me? Because if it's like a person that you're like, oh, they don't really seem like a person I can have a long conversation with about something casual like the weather or, anything like that, it's going to be hard to feel like you can open up more. So that's definitely a process that I think can be really helpful.
I think the other strange thing about my process, well, that I realized, and this is nothing to do really in the end with gender, but I mean, I found myself explicitly knowing that finding a female therapist versus a male one. And again, like I've got a lot of really deep relationships with male friends, right? Like again, I run a pretty open circle in terms of like what we share with each other because we're just those types of people, right? We like to take care of each other and be honest. But even within that honesty with my male friend group, the social sort of the social constructs pop in, and then it's a much smaller circle of openness than say with my female friends. So I just innately felt like, I mean, I don't even want to bark up the tree of a male therapist, even though a male therapist is probably way more equipped to have those conversations compared to like what I'm experiencing with my male friend group. It's just I gravitated. I tend to be a little bit more emotionally vulnerable around females. So like I just, it wasn't like I was waking up every morning and being like, gonna find me a female therapist. It's just what I ended up landing on. Just I think I was naturally drawn to it, kind of deal. It wasn't like I sat there and excluded dudes from the list of things, but it just totally felt like I was weighted towards one side.
And I would imagine that's okay. You could have a preference for, I want therapists with brown hair or whatever. I would give myself the grace and the latitude to just the space to just say whatever it needs for me to feel comfortable enough and to build a rapport with someone, that's what I'm going to pursue. It could be that they only wear purple shoes. If that's what it takes, then that's what it takes for me to open up. And I wanted to just hop back really quickly to a point when you were talking about your first session, because I think I had counted, it ended up being about 9 therapists total, just that I've seen over the years. I had become a black belt in scrambling out of emotional vulnerability. So I went into that with already quite a few therapists worth of experience, and I knew I needed help. But my mentality was, I'm going to go in and she's going to fix me, and I am going to do exactly 0 of the work in terms of opening up to her or trusting her. So I don't know if Olivia, if you want to talk about if there are any differences between people who don't know what they don't know and people who have been through the system a few times and go, oh yeah, I know how this dance goes. I'm here because I have to be, but you're not getting anything out of me.
There's so many factors that affect it. And I think like what you talked about earlier, if you had support in your life that encouraged you to go to therapy and that you had positive messages about it growing up and through those like kind of formational periods of your life, that it wasn't something you pulled the trigger on because you maybe weren't ready, but it was something that you knew if you did it, you would have support with it. And you had that backing of like in your head, you believed it already to be something that could be helpful. Whereas Tanya, I know we've talked about in your past, that was not the same level of support growing up, of you didn't necessarily have a space where people said, yes, you should go to therapy. That would be really helpful for you. And same like for me growing up, it was therapy was something of like, if you go there, they will tell you that you're bad and they'll fix you.
Yeah.
And I think that has a huge effect on one, whether or not people go, and two, how you present in that first session. And like you said, Tanya, you've had so many therapists before that at some point you kind of just get like desensitized by it. And it's like, all right, like, what do you have for me? Like the roles kind of reverse of you feeling like, well, I've tried all these people. Like, what can you do for me that they couldn't do for me? And so I think the first time you see a therapist is a really big moment, because this is the first person. It's like your first boyfriend or girlfriend, right? Like it is the first person you are showing this part of yourself to. And so that's why it's a really big deal that therapists are showing up every time as if this is the first time someone is coming into contact with the field. Because if you have your first therapist be a really bad one who is not listening and not present and harms you further, that can keep people away from the field, or it can make it so that when they do try a new therapist, they're very closed off and it's a lot more work for them to unlearn that stuff. So, I mean, that's what I've seen just with clients of like people who have done it before are sometimes very skeptical, but also people who are new are sometimes very skeptical. So there's a lot of things that I think play a role with it.
You guys made me think about something here about my experience in that first one. So like another side of that. So you guys are right. Like I self-identified. I have very supportive environment. I was informed about therapy, right, and its benefits kind of deal. So there was an opposite effect that I had to kind of fight for the first, I'd say, 1 or 2 sessions. So 2 parts. First part is I don't even know where to begin, right? Like, so like, again, like I'd waited a long time. Like I'm 40 years old. Okay. Like literally I turned 40 this year, getting old, long in the tooth kind of deal in terms of young dudes. Right. I've been thinking about or positing that I should go get help for a long time. Right. And like, it was just this middle part of my life sort of stabilized, right? Which then confuses you, like, oh, I must have accidentally fixed myself, so no worries, right? But that waiting plus the time I'd already spent, developing the things that tormented me or traumatized me, right? Like that first 20 years of my life living at home, I accumulated a lot of baggage, right? So it's like those first couple sessions, I don't even know where we begin and what that feels like, right? So like, that first session, I don't know. I think I was driven internally just to try to spit as much of it out as possible. So like my therapist would understand how much of a mess I am and how much work we had ahead of us. Right. Like it was like, I'm warning you, right? Like one of those deals. But the other side, and this is more the point I want to make, again, for people who are looking to get into help, right? So like, let's say you've got a supportive environment like Rob, and let's say you understand like therapy is probably a good thing, just like Rob. Well, Rob struggled with what I should expect as an outcome, even from that first therapy session. Like I literally had to fight this feeling that like I walked away from that first therapy session going, I don't feel any fucking better. But it was weird. Like here I had been in this first session. I had, to your point, Olivia, I'd bared my soul kind of deal, or wore my heart on my sleeve, or whatever kind of cliche phrase we want to use for that sort of connotation. I walked away going like, I don't feel like we accomplished anything. Right. And yes, looking back, like, yes, it's all rapport building and whatnot. And, Rome wasn't built in a day kind of deal. But it's weird how my brain thought that, that a piece of this puzzle would be put back in the box after this session. It just wasn't the case. And it wasn't the case for many sessions. For as logical of a person as I am, it was almost intriguing how illogical my brain, in seeking and wanting relief from what I'd been struggling with, how actively it wanted some solution to come out of even a single session, right? And then to your point, Tanya, walking out of, this one I still struggle with, and I'm like, 6, 7 deep, and I go every 2 to 3 weeks kind of deal. This idea that, like someone doing the work. I don't even know what that work looks like for the most part, right? Like, I don't know what it feels like. I mean, I have homework every single time and I think I do it, but like, I don't know if it's working. Like, I don't know if I'm doing it right. Like I got all these, all the standard stuff like, oh, let's, become friends with the little child, like firefighter inside you kind of deal, like trying to control the crises. I don't know what that person sounds like. I know he's in there, but I don't know, so like for those first sessions, they weren't really clear, and I don't think they're supposed to be. But I think a lot of people, if they don't understand that that's what it's going to be, I think it can feel like a detractor. I mean, if we bring it down to the basics, right, of life, like you expend as much energy as minimally necessary to survive, right? So if you don't get some positive outcome, a living thing is not going to try to continue doing the behavior, right? So it's important to have some awareness that like there's no magic, like, to your point, Olivia, like go to therapy and they will fix you. Like, it's not really like that. It's not like building something. Like it is, but it's not like I put these 4 blocks and I've got I've got a start of a foundation. Like it's not as tangible as that. Like you just kind of have to trust that it's going to feel like you have no clue what's going on around you for a while in the start of that process, or at least again was for me, right?
I've said on previous episodes, I walked in with the spiel is what I call it. I just unload. I'm like, here you go. I'm irreparable. I'm broken. There is no fixing it. And it's a weird analogy, but it's the equivalent of going to an MMA fighter and just going, I see red, bro. You can't handle this smoke. You can't do this. Because therapists they've been through it. They've seen some things, and Olivia can speak more to that. And the other thing that really resonated with me, even after, or maybe perhaps by all those experiences with other therapists, is that the first few sessions with Catherine, I was stymied by the fact that I walked away not being sure that anything was fixed. I thought that just talking and venting about how angry I am at my mom or whomever, that would fix it. That would be it. That is the work. And I had this idea that there was some sort of warranty or guarantee where 30 minutes to fix your mommy issues or your money back when it comes to therapy. And it turns out that's not the case. But Olivia, if you want to just reiterate about the I see red, bro mentality that people have, and maybe the motivations as to why they think that you may not be able to handle it, all that stuff.
Yeah. And, like you said, your therapist seems young. And that is an issue I have come across before, where I look very young and I am young. And I think that is a little bit concerning to some clients, especially ones who are, decades older than me. There's this kind of belief of, how can you possibly help me? How can you possibly be able to hold all of the pain that I've been through in these 40 years when you are not that age? Or like, how can I trust that you have been through enough that this is not going to scare you or overwhelm you? And so I think that's something that comes up a lot, where clients will do exactly what you said of intake session 1. They just say everything that has ever happened and really try to dig home that there are these horrors in their life. And there are, but I think it's almost like a subconscious test of like, can you hold my pain? Like, are you going to continue to look at me when I'm sharing this with you? Because I think a lot of people's experience with regular people, friends, whatever, the internet, is that when you share really heavy things, they are physically and metaphorically turning their head, because for them to keep looking would require them to also confront the possibility that those things can or have happened to them. And so I think that is the glue in the beginning of therapy, before there's really that understanding of like, well, how is any of this really going to help? I think what keeps people in it is seeing that this is a person that you can say anything to, and they are not going to be, I don't want to say fazed by it, because we clearly care and are going to be hurt to hear that you're hurt, but they're not going to look away. And so I think that has, in my experience, been the thing that helps bridge that gap between session 1 and like when it starts feeling like it's not as jumbled.
And it's interesting, actually, you put it that way, because I hadn't thought of it that way, right? So, spoiler alert for anybody who's thinking about going to therapy, you will have this light bulb of, I didn't think of it that way before, quite often, if my early experience is any indicator. Okay, so just spoiler alert. So, Olivia, being a therapist, you just triggered it once more. Okay, so like, and what I mean by that is, like, I walked into that first session, I mean, not really any different than what you just explained it, but the narrative in my head was something a little bit different, right? And it was like, oh, like, this is probably what I have to do. Like, I have to show this person the scope of what we're working with. Not consciously, because I'm sitting here testing the trust, right? The lake of trust we're gonna boat on kind of deal, right? I don't know. I just made that up, Tanya. I saw your face. But frankly, now that you say it like that is absolutely, I think, where it was coming from, is this idea that, like, can you handle my library, right? This thing that I struggle with every day, and I carry it every day and mostly hide it from everyone, right? I think in the end I was testing the waters. Like, can you deal with what I've had to deal with Like, and I get that you don't have to carry it, but like to even listen to it, right? And if you can't begin to listen to it, then like, how can we help me, right? Again, I entered it just being like, oh, well, this is just a part of the professional process. I should probably, tell them all the chapters of the book and then we'll target them later. But I think it absolutely was a test now that I think of it, And I never thought of it like that until today. So thank you.
Yeah, she'll do that to you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's not even her therapist hat that she's wearing. It's just her brilliant human being hat.
It's really not on purpose.
That's a skill in itself, I think, in this arena, as I'm coming to find. Like, I mean, that is why I'm still with my current therapist, is what I've recognized is that over the last few sessions, there's more and more of those moments that I just talked about, where it's not that we're actually talking about new information. It's actually stuff that I'm very, very educated on, right? In terms of my own personal life experience and how I've, synthesized conclusions about those things. No matter all of that knowledge and self-awareness, like I'm getting more and more of those moments. I'm like, man, Susan, like I just never thought about it from that particular angle. Like it was an unknown to me. It wasn't like I had the thought and then walked away. Like literally just new perspectives on things I thought I understood. And I still understand them, but that new perspective is a new layer to that understanding, right?
Yeah, I like to think about it like a Rubik's Cube. Like when clients walk into therapy, that's what I picture sometimes. And it's like, I think it's really helpful for me because I'm never viewing them as a thing that needs to be fixed. It's just that we need to rearrange some beliefs and some experiences so that you're able to function better, right? Like you already have all the pieces that you need. It's just that maybe the way that you think about them is harming you. And the way that you are experiencing things are feeling really out of place. And I can help you figure out the path to putting them back in place so that you feel more settled.
Well, in the Rubik's Cube sort of an analogy is actually, again, hadn't thought of it that way. But that's a really good example, right? Like if you mix a Rubik's Cube up to completion, right? Like, or resetting it to its solvable format. Most people will look at a Rubik's Cube and be like, what do I even turn first? And the answer to what you turn next only becomes clearer the more you turn, right? So the more things you put into place, the next move becomes more clear, right? And the easiest moves are the ones that are at the end, right? But the first move is like, I can turn anything here. It's just still going to be a jumbled mess of colors, man, right?
Yeah, it all feels confusing. And it feels like any move you make is still going to leave you with just a mess of colors. And I think that the end goal is, yes, to have it kind of like a completed Rubik's Cube where you can see each parts of your life in a really organized format, but life is never going to just let you keep a completed Rubik's Cube all the time, right? Like things are going to happen that are going to jumble it again. And I think the function of therapy is to make it easier for you to be able to put it back together when those things happen, right? And recognize that like when huge things happen, like the loss of a sibling, like there's going to be things that can never go back together. But it's like, maybe you're losing some colors off of it, but you can still have a person there to help you manage it in a way that you're not going back to square one of, okay, let's just, I had this horrible thing happen. Let's just go back to square one. It doesn't matter. Like everything is over. It's like, okay, well, how can we have you move forward with things while recognizing that life might be a little harder because now you're like, we peeled the paint off of one of the colors. Like that kind of idea.
That was brilliant. And just hearing this exchange between both of you, I had my own light bulb moment where the Rubik's Cube analogy and Rob, you talking about how the next move is just, as long as you start and then it eventually will fall into place as the therapist and you figure it out. And it feels like jujitsu. When you don't have a chance to study your opponent, you start. You just start somewhere. And usually it's not some crazy aggressive flying triangle where you just dive right in. It is opening grips. You feel each other out. That's what all of fighting, that's what all of relating is you initially just feel each other out, figure it out. And the way I was listening to you talk about your how you unloaded was fascinating, because I had a lot of that is, will you look away? And also I had a self-protective instinct where I was, stay the fuck away from me, even though I came to you for help. But it's just really fascinating to see the different, I guess, flavors. And aside, what did your therapist, actually, we'll start for here first. Okay, so we'll start with, this is for anyone who has any idea. Where do you start? Talk about how no one knows how to start. Usually we think we have to unload, and it's not that it's wrong per se, but are there, I wouldn't say protocols, but are there other paths that don't involve just going blah, emotional bukakeing is what I refer to it as. Are there other ways that you can have an intake or a first few initial sessions that you can experiment and see how that feels for you?
My experience is that everyone kind of does it differently, and I try not to dictate what the experience is going to look like, because some people I think really do need to throw everything at you and see how you respond. And other people are the total opposite. They give me nothing, and they say that they're there for something that feels more surface level, like, social anxiety or troubles with focus or things like that, not that they're not bad, they're just more kind of cut and dry. And then we do that work for months, and then all of a sudden one day bomb gets dropped and there's some heavy abuse, neglect, trauma that has been there that they just weren't ready yet. And so I don't think there's a right or wrong way to do it. And that's why I always say, like, the clients are the expert in their own life. I'm just meeting you. I am a stranger to you. Even if you share your whole life story with me, I'm still a stranger. I didn't go through those things with you. I'm just hearing you say them. So you're the only person who's going to know when you're ready to go certain places. And that might mean that you feel really comfortable telling me what happened on session 1, but you're not going to feel comfortable about actually diving into how that's affected you until session 20. And so I think with like, is there a right or wrong way? No. I think it's like whatever feels like this is what needs to come out of my mouth right now. That's what I encourage clients to say.
I think for myself, like, what was driving it was because I didn't know where we were going, right? That unloading was like, I might as well tell you everything and you pick where you think we need to start first, right? Like, let me give you the whole picture and you tell me what the right path through this is, right? Rather than withholding information and things. Like, again, I just didn't know how to do it any different. Like I said, I'm a pretty open person and I believe more data is better, right? So I spit it out in that regard. Now, to your point, Olivia, at the same time, I was very good at even self-identifying what problems came from the story that I was telling. The part that I'm still not that great at, and it's a part that we're working on in my therapy. It's one of those questions you jokingly get annoyed at your therapist because they're so persistent about, but like the thought of like how things feel, and I don't mean like even necessarily how you think they feel, like, or the concept of being aware of the emotion, but literally how they physically and physiologically feel in those moments, is a constant question we come back to, and that's the part that's taking time. Not only because obviously there's a part of me that's extremely guarded, it's how I survived, right? But there's also, going back to the common thread statement, I don't know what it's supposed to feel like sometimes, right? Like, what I discovered is that a lot of that awareness of the acute feeling, where it feels, how it feels, when it feels, right? Like, literally, we've tried, like, where in your body does it hurt kind of deal, right? Like, I still struggle with that portion just because I don't know. Like, part of my survival was I knew I was, much like a lot of people. You hear this story all the time, right? Like, we carried all this baggage, and how we learn to survive carrying this warehouse full of baggage is you disassociate, or you learn coping mechanisms to actually detach, not from the concept of what you're feeling, but the literal feeling of it, right? Because I mean, for me, it was the direct result of the feelings were too intense, right? Like the part that you can't control. Like obviously you can't control when you're sad or upset or whatever, but like literally the feeling was too intense, right?
Yeah.
So you tend to run and hide from it, and I did that for almost 40 years, right? So it becomes the safe place to be. It's like, oh, I'm fine, right?
Yeah. Olivia and I were both laughing because not at you, but
I
this
didn't
is
take it
very
that
a
way.
don't get me started part of it because it was fucking enraging for the first year. I had mentioned it, I believe, early in the earlier episode where I was fuming at myself and probably let it out to her too. What the fuck does this matter? Why do you keep repeating this? What this is annoying. And I think that is something that I, at the risk of sounding arrogant, more intellectually driven people tend to use their brain to understand the situation and their logic. And and due to the survival mechanisms that they cultivated, they cut off the emotional tie, but your brain is your body and your body is your brain. And it is hard. I can't say how your journey is going to go, but for me, the journey is still ongoing. And at first it was confusion, frustration, terror, because now she has essentially passed my guard, and now I am exceedingly vulnerable and a lot of confusing. It's very much learning a new language and developing a dialogue with myself, that one that I never felt I was safe enough to cultivate outside of very few specific moments. And I'm still learning. It is fascinating how much information there is in physical sensations.
And actually, you said something I want to touch
Of
on
course.
because it speaks very specifically to my inner workings, right? So you talked about this logical brain kind of thing. I have a very powerfully illogical brain. It's helped me in my professional career, succeeding in that, analyzing things. I'm very good with human behavior. I am one of those quintessential people. I step in a room and I know who you are, right? But understanding that's a skill set developed by a small child, always trying to predict what bullshit was coming down the pipe, right? So like I can't even turn that off. Now that also then led to a life of being very intellectually stimulated and powerful, right? So like I learn a lot. Again, I walked into this therapy journey with a very, very good self-awareness of all the little dark corners, right? The thing I struggled and continue to struggle with, even though I'm getting better at it because I've got a therapist to help me through these things in the process, right? But like that logical, and again, I have to imagine I'm not that special and other people think this way too, right? Like I still struggle with the thought that I know all of my BS and I'm so good at knowing all my BS. So how come I can't change it? Right? Like that one killed me. Not killed me, but like it's one that I struggle with because in all other facets of my life, within reason, right? Like I've got a lot of baggage, so I'm not a perfectly successful person because I hold myself back and all that sort of stuff, right? But I mean, I truly was like, man, I've achieved all these things that I've wanted to do, and relatively, you know, well-rounded person, all these sort of things. Like I can create stuff with my hands if I want to, kind of deal. And why can't I unmix the soup that's in my head, right? Like even though I know everything, like I could tell you all of the traumas, but that doesn't matter, right? And
Right.
I think most of the people I run into, like my friend circles, like a lot of them are pretty astute too, but they struggle with that same thing.
Yeah. And Olivia, if you want to get into why there may be instances of, say, CEOs sobbing about a memory they had when their teddy bear was stolen when they're 9 years old.
Being logical is almost something that makes therapy harder because it's you can't intellectualize your experience and think that that is going to be enough to heal from it. It's helpful to know, okay, this thing has happened to me. This is how it affects me. It makes it really hard for me to show up in relationships or focus or be vulnerable with people or, whatever. But it's like using the inner child example, right? It's like the difference between saying, I know there is a kid starving in that room And I know there's a kid starving in that room. I'm going to go sit in that room and feed him. Being able to not just be aware of it, but to go and act on that healing of yourself of, yes, this horrible thing has happened to me. I need to sit with it. And that is the worst feeling, right? Of like actually feeling it in your body again and like bringing yourself back to that state of like remembering being 7 years old and feeling so unheard or neglected or abused or whatever it is. And it's not something that you can just do anywhere, right? Like that's why therapy is helpful because you are really opening a door that is very hard to be closed then. So having a safe space to do that is very important, but that actual process of feeling it in your body and really feeling that like inner child and those parts of yourself and sitting with them rather than just recognizing that they're there is, in my experience, the thing that creates lasting change because you are able to really truly allow your body to see that you are no longer there, right? Instead of pointing it out and knowing that you're stuck, it's recognizing that you don't have to stay in that house that you grew up in. That was awful, right? Like you can unstick yourself and be actually present in your current life. And it's a very hard process, but I think that's why it's so important to feel it in your body and not just intellectualize it. But that journey is very infuriating because it's not logical. And when you explain it to someone, they're like, how is that possibly going to help me? And I'm like, well, I don't know, but you can try it.
Yeah.